Hi, I'm Austin Wintry, and here is another one of my Q&A videos. As always, I look for the questions from the previous Q&A videos comment section, so if you've left one before that I haven't gotten to, or if you have a new question, leave it in the comments of this video. I found a ton that I really liked and that seemed interesting, so I'm going to do my best to get through them as fast as possible. If it warrants follow-up, just let me know in the comments and I'm happy to do it. So, with that said, I'm going to dive straight in. Someone asked me this literally today on Twitter as I was sitting down to record this. Normally, I'd like to keep it kind of strictly from the previous video's comment sections, so forgive me for violating my own rule, but here is the question. Do you like playing all the games you do music for? I actually just had to answer this because it's a fun question, and it's actually interesting. I often consider it a kind of quasi-tragedy. That's too strong of a word, but you can get my meaning. That as someone who works on a game, and especially someone like myself who's had the great privilege of working on some really powerful games like the Banner Saga franchise and Flow and Journey and Abzu and the Pathless, games that have a real strong emotional potential to them, I can't ever experience that as a player. I don't get to kind of wipe my brain free and then play it. So we're always creating a thing that we ourselves can't really partake in, at least most of the games I've worked on. Now, that said, I, irrespective of that problem, often can't really play the games that I've worked on because I just find myself so critical and analytical of my own work and trying to think of ways I could have done it better, or finding mistakes or things that I wish I could improve on or patch even. It makes it very difficult. The one exception, for whatever reason, in my whole career has been the trilogy of the Banner Saga games, which I've played through multiple times. And somehow, I don't know how I was able to suspend my normal kind of issue of getting over my own work, but I was able to play those kind of just as a player. And I love those games. I love Stoic Studio. So that seems to be the one exception. Everything else, I have to just kind of appreciate from a kind of a distance. So there you go. I don't know if this is too specific a question for you to answer, but how often are there callbacks in Stray Gods songs? Because calling back to previous choices makes the amount of possible versions even more bonkers, and I'm wondering how often this happens. Obviously, I'm not going to get into anything spoilery with Stray Gods, but I love that this question and a few of the other ones I've got coming forward recognize some of the interesting challenges the game poses, because needless to say, I'll just leave it at this. Yes, there are songs that entail callbacks to others, and yes, that does make them way more complicated because of the branching nature of not only the song that's taking place in, but the songs it has to look back and reference. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to be doing so many videos about Stray Gods because I just can't wait to share all the insanity with you. But it's a savvy question for someone to pick up on, and obviously a musical theater fan. Assuming there will be a soundtrack album for Stray Gods, I can't imagine there wouldn't be from a business standpoint. How will you navigate the fact that no single version of a song will be canon? Will there be duplicate tracks with different choices, or maybe you'll curate a version that best represents all possibilities? I'm very curious. Okay, so this has basically been one of the number one sources of anxiety for me the last several years. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm going to be making more videos and things down the road about Stray Gods and specifically about this problem. So all I wanted to say is just highlight that it is very important to me and the folks I worked on these songs with, and the folks on the developers side at Summer Fall Games, to make sure that there really truly is not one best or correct version of these songs. That even though there's literally hundreds of thousands or even millions of different permutations that are possible, that they fully embrace the idea that it's role playing, that it's encouraging you to do what you would do, or at least what you think Grace ought to do. And so yes, how to make a soundtrack album? You are ahead of the curve in wondering about that. I'm going to be talking about my plans there. There's no perfect solution, but I am looking forward to revealing kind of what we've done, and I just wanted to highlight that I admire multiple of you being savvy enough to spot that this has been a challenge. Speaking of challenges, next one, Was writing music for Stray Gods novel, choose your own adventure musical style easier, harder, or about as difficult as you expected? Would you do it again? So this made me laugh. The choose your own adventure novel comparison is a pretty accurate one with regard to this game, but the way I've been describing it to folks is imagine a choose your own adventure novel with the thickness of a phone book, meaning it's not just here's this chapter, if you want to open door 1, go to that page, door 2, this page, then it's over. It's like just thousands and thousands of possible places to go. It's pretty nuts. So yeah, to say that it's been a challenge is a dramatic understatement. Now, I set myself up for challenges on just about every project I work on because I enjoy kind of saying, well, what would be the easy way to do this or the expected way to do this? And let's discard that immediately. So what's the more narrow way to look at it? There's a phenomenal director I've worked with many times in my career named Paul Sollett, who often referred to this as option C, where he goes, option A is the thing that just about any competent professional could do. This is the thing that anybody with a kind of half-developed skill in this particular field, and in his case, he would be referring to directors or composers or editors, cinematographers, game designers, animators, it doesn't matter. The idea is if you get to some baseline level, any could do this. That's option A. It's serviceable, it does the job, it's got a kind of utilitarian value, but there's nothing inherently special about it. Option B cuts out 90% of folks and says, okay, now this is something that, only that 10% of really kind of focused or really creative or really whatever folks could do. He always says, what's beyond that is option C. It's not just something that hopefully, theoretically, requires a high level of talent and skill and probably experience as a result, but it's something that is so unique to the personality of the person making it that really only they could make it. Like Paul would often bring this up when we're working on films of his to say something like, what is the thing that only we would do? And it's not just only I would do as a composer, specifically me, Austin, but I would do in the context of collaborating with him, which is a different kind of pressure cooker or incubator than with a different director or with a game studio and amongst different game studios. Giant Squid and Matt Nava are going to ask different things of me than Stoic and the Banner Saga team or something like that. So option C says, what's a thing that could only really exist here and now? And that's going to be partially a product of skill and partially a product of leaning into our subjectivity. And so all that said, I definitely frequently make things difficult for myself because I'm looking for that option C, and it's not easy to find, and different projects make it harder. But holy crap, did Stray Gods make it a lot harder than normal. I'm really, really grateful to have collaborated with many incredible folks. I'll be doing, again, I keep saying this, but I'll be doing more videos about that and specifically talking about my amazing collaborators, but I happily mention them here. The songwriter group called Tripod, based in Melbourne, of Stephen Gates, Simon Hall, and Scott Edgar. I've worked with them a handful of times over the year. I worship the ground they walk on. I think they're absolutely fabulous songwriters, musicians, storytellers, comedians. They're amazing. I just love working with them to death, and I couldn't imagine embarking on this without them. And then someone newer to my life who I also just absolutely adored working with is Montaigne, fabulous singer, songwriter, producer, pop artist from Australia as well, who incidentally had to pause our collaboration on Stray Gods in order to go be Australia's representative for Eurovision with an incredibly catchy and sticky song called Technicolor that still to this day is sort of burned into me. Anyway, absolute delight collaborating with them. And needless to say, that even with working with a team as great as them, and of course Summerfall Side, my normal musical team that I work with and recording musicians, all those kinds of folks, this thing was just a hard motherfucker. It was really difficult, way beyond the expectations of difficulty for, I think, all of us. And would I do it again? Oh, hell yes, absolutely. I like when things are difficult. I like, as Troy would often say to our cast members while we were recording and facing difficult days, he would like to remind them we can do hard things. And I find that as a very kind of empowering mantra. And yeah, it's difficult. And there are days where I found myself doubting if it would work or if I was capable of doing this and doing what it seemingly deserved. But that's what I signed up for. Specifically, those moments of doubt are baked into the premise of why I would want to do it to begin with. All right, this question is several in one, but they were kind of all independently interesting, and I decided to go for it. Main question: are there any jobs in the game music industry that don't require a knowledge of the fundamentals of creating music, being able to write music or read, play music, etc.? I know this sounds insane, maybe a bit overstating the case, but seemingly a huge portion of my passion in life in the last several years has been in game audio, whether that's sound effects or scoring. I have a love of game audio. My background, however, is mainly in two areas: audio equipment, recording somewhat but massively on the reproduction side, speakers, headphones, source equipment, and the works, and my employment background is in IT. But I would love to make a transition to the game audio scene or even movie TV, and it seems extremely daunting. Well, let me just throw out a couple things. First off, game audio very much encompasses sound design, and I know lots of sound designers that, even though many are gifted musicians in a kind of side hobby sort of way, or even they have musical training but then found a career in sound design, it's not required. Now, I think it benefits from having an intrinsic musicality, because a lot of sound design that feels almost like a version of music tends to be really great. I always look to people like Ben Burt as a quintessential example of this. He's one of the gods of sound design. All these iconic sounds from Star Wars are his, and Wall-E, and it goes on and on and on. Ben Burt, I don't think, would describe himself as a musician, at least not to my knowledge, but there is a real musicality to what he does. So clearly it's a benefit to approaching that. I would say there's also a lot of technical work to be done in game audio that you probably don't technically have to have like musical training. And again, it would benefit you, but it is not required. So for example, I've worked many times with a handful of folks on the audio implementation side, where we get into programs like Fmod and Wise, and we collaborate together to build out the kind of scripting that makes the music's intended behavior come to life in the game. Could do a whole separate video about those sorts of things. You can see a little glimpse with my friend and long-running comrade in arms, Steve Green, in the How to Write 1 Minute of Music from the Pathless video, and you can see the actual setup that he and I put together in Wise that he then had to actually implement from the developer side. And Steve is not a musician, and yet he and I have collaborated many times, and I would argue very successfully. So that's one example, and I think there's many. Also, one of the things that I think is interesting about most industries is that there's always an opportunity to kind of create your own niche, create your own role. If you find yourself really zeroing in on audio engineering and want to be a scoring stage engineer or assistant engineer or a mixer or things like that, these are avenues open for you to chase down and to kind of carve out your place in. And yeah, all of these things benefit from musical training, but you know, when I'm working with somebody in that capacity, it's not like I grill them or ask them what's their musical background. We just get the work done, and those that are really great, we work together again, or try to, and let the work speak for itself. So I'm not a big fan of worrying about credentialing or anything like that. It's really more about just, does the skill set benefit you? So hopefully that at least sort of addresses what you're asking. I imagine you could land just about any indie kind of project. But with that said, do you ever take a quick job for cash that you are less invested in to ensure that you can manage to spend far longer on a game that you are more invested in? Say a game of giant squid qualities, someone you know, interesting music interactions, the work. So this is actually a really interesting question. On the face of it, it seemed like, are you just asking, do I ever kind of just take quick little money grab jobs? But I love the context that you put that in, where you say, do I take those jobs because they might enable me to sort of do other jobs and take on sort of more runway to give to them? And it's an interesting question. I'll say this. There have been a couple projects in my career that I took on thinking that they could potentially sort of just help subsidize other works. And I pretty much always regretted it, because music is a thing that I can't really take not deeply personally. So because I invariably end up very invested and very kind of committed on an emotional level, if it's a thing that I didn't fully believe in at the beginning, now I find myself in a situation where I'm working really hard for a thing that has pretty limited payoff, and the money I don't think is worth it enough. Now I'm really lucky, very privileged. I'm very grateful to say that I earn living very comfortably and am able to survive on the projects I want to do. So I don't really ever need to take money jobs by that same token. Now, of course, if somebody came along and said, I'll give you $1 billion to score this thing, and I don't particularly love it, that would be a serious thing to think about, because that's a whole other level of runway. But I'm very grateful that in the meantime, I really only do the things that I want to do, but I fully acknowledge that is a situation I've had to really work to get towards. I was not in that position early on, and the farther back you go in my career, the more jobs there are that I didn't necessarily, want to share with everyone I ever met and make YouTube videos about, to put it mildly. And last part of this question, have you ever listened to Joel Corliss's masterpiece of a soundtrack for Eastward? I haven't. I certainly know Joel Corliss's work pretty well, and I believe we've met a time or two, although I can't remember the last time I actually saw him in person, maybe at GDC years ago or something like that, but he's certainly very good at what he does, and I hold him in high regard. I don't know this particular score, though. Any thoughts on the latest AI developments? For example, I'm wondering what your take is on Gareth Coker's recent call out of Audio Jungle automatically opting in all users of the music as training data. Have you been looking into any tools yourself? Look, this is going to invariably be worth its own video, so I'll just quickly comment. I remember seeing Gareth's tweet, and I shared it myself. I retweeted his tweet. In other words, I think companies opting you in automatically on this kind of thing is a rather boneheaded move, because I think getting signal boosted and sort of dragged through the mud is an inevitable consequence. It's sort of a self-inflicted PR wound, it seems to me. But that said, I am very curious about all the different ways that AI can be used as a composer's tool, as artists of any stripes tool. I don't think technology is in general a thing we should ever be automatically afraid of. But there's no question that it's going to be changing the landscape pretty aggressively. So I tend to have a wait and see, because I don't like to make proclamations about things when they feel very premature. It seems that most of the kind of futurists who make these sort of bold predictions are just wildly wrong most of the time. But that said, I think it's pretty safe to say it's going to impact the world in sort of immeasurably profound ways, if it hasn't already. And I'm excited to, incorporate it more and more into what I'm doing and to experiment with it. But in terms of the legal side, on that specific Audio Jungle case, yeah, that definitely rubbed me the wrong way. As a writer, I often find inspiration in things outside of writing. Sometimes music, places, and more abstract feelings inspire me more than any book can. Outside of music, what kinds of things do this for you when you are creating? So I'm a big advocate of this. I absolutely love looking to the outside world to look for inspiration, because I find that not only is it fertile and it hits you in unexpected ways, but of course it's what a lot of my heroes have done as well. When you read about great symphonic works in the classical repertoire, or great albums from legendary rock bands and metal bands and jazz and blues artists and all that kind of thing, it is so often reflections on life experiences they had, or they're writing about a lost loved one, or relationship dramas, a classic reason to write music. These things that are not intrinsically musical in and of themselves. And needless to say, the whole history of choral music and of, lieder and chanson and the various kind of art song subgenres are pretty much all inspired by the poetry in the texts that they're setting, or the libretti in the world of opera, that sort of thing. Well, I find all of that to be deeply compelling, and I think that composers need to constantly make sure they're getting away from their desk in order to look for inspiration. The biggest ones for me are travel, for sure. I love meeting people that have fundamentally different lives than mine. Now, being a composer, and specifically composers spend so much time doing video games, just about everyone on the planet has a very different life from me, so I don't have to go very far. I could walk down the street to the Lay's bakery or coffee shop and immediately strike up a conversation with people who are just living fundamentally different lives. But travel for me is number one. I really, really love to explore the world. We are lucky to find ourselves on an absolutely beautiful planet, completely covered in this just magnificent, diverse array of cultures and tastes and foods and all this kinds of thing. Architecture, for me, that's the best. Perfect example of this was this last winter. I took a little kind of mini European tour trip, and among the stops was a night in Prague. in the Czech Republic. And my dear friend and YouTube superstar Alex Mukala took myself and another dear friend named Andrea Pacino on a little walking tour of the downtown area of Prague, and showing us some of the sights and bringing us up to speed on some of the history. And I absolutely loved it. It was an amazing experience. And that's the kind of thing that it gets my general motor running. Now, if you were to say, what piece of music did that specifically inspire? That I don't have an answer to, because it's not really about, oh, that thing inspired this other thing. Now, there are examples of that. We've spoken at length about how on The Pathless, Matt Nava, the creative director, and I began by looking at Mongolian falcon, like the falconry style hunting that happens in Mongolia, and how that was a big inspiration for sort of the general DNA of the game. And that's what led me to thinking about throat singing, and then kind of into the specific niche of Tuvan throat singing by way of tangent. And so there's an example where we led to actually a pretty concrete musical idea by looking at something in the real world and kind of exploring it and talking about it. And I love that. But more often than not, it's just a generalized notion of living the fullest possible human experience, and realizing that that's going to percolate down into your imagination in ways that you can't predict and plan for and do consciously. Austin, I love listening to you talk about music and the way it is made, and your general passion for game and movie soundtracks. So keep up the great work. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I really enjoy putting things out on this channel. I'm basically just a nerd, and it's very validating that other people seem to have some level of enjoyment of my nerdiness. So I asked myself, what made you share the art of your craft? Is it your own interest in making these things public? Are you one of the DVD specials watchers and audio commentary listeners? Is there a general openness in the games industry that you adopted for yourself, especially given the fact that your work coincides with a wave of closer look documentaries? Or is there another reason? So I love this question, and people actually ask me versions of this in person all the time. And I will say that for 15 plus years, I've been making my annual pilgrimage to the Game Developers Conference. And the whole premise of the Game Developers Conference is, how do we get together as an industry, as seemingly the entire industry, tens of thousands of professionals all trying to make games together, and pull back the curtain on our processes, our mistakes, our victories, our defeats, as part of the projects that we work on. And how do we shine a light on all that such that people might take it and run with it and make things better for next year's GDC. It's a kind of broad, and I phrase that kind of messily, but hopefully that makes sense. It always felt like this retrospective of, here's what we did, now let's try to do more and better. And that's just a general feeling that pervades the game industry that I love. There are countless conventions and seminars, and but I found myself going, it's not enough to just share in this kind of limited, very gate-kept place. And I love GDC. I never miss it, but it's expensive. It's inconvenient. It's physically in one specific spot on the planet. And considering it's a global industry, that puts a lot of people at a disadvantage to reach it. So I just thought to myself, well, look, I really enjoy geeking out with colleagues and friends and doing things like the Game Maker's Notebook or Play, Watch, Listen, where we really get to talk about the process and put it out there for people to digest and make with whatever they want. But I think I can do better than that. The other reason why I especially felt motivated to do this channel was because I get a lot of emails from young composers and people just starting out, or people pivoting into this line of work, or even people that have been in the industry for a while. And there's certain questions that tend to come up again and again and again. And so I thought, well, rather than spend all this time writing emails, because I hate ignoring messages from people, and I try to get to all of them if I can. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes I get busy and things get sort of lost. But I realized I can more efficiently try to take the most recurring questions and just put them on YouTube in the hopes that they might just find them on their own organically, or at minimum, I can just write back quickly an email saying, here's a link, take a look at this. It's just an efficiency thing. And then the more I started to do it, the more it became its own creative outlet, where I just found myself going, ooh, it would be really fun to talk about this. And that's where you end up with things like these Magic Moments videos that I periodically get into, or the Love Like Comrades videos, or other little things beyond just the ones that are sort of self-servingly in a way about my work, the as noted videos, or the behind the scenes, or under the hood, all that kind of thing. So really it just became a love of sharing as inspired by my colleagues who were already doing it in the game industry, and the fact that I'm a nerd. Here's another way I would summarize it that is a little idealistic, but honestly is the most true version. I am a gamer. I am a musician. I'm a lover of music. I consume music. All of those things make me just as much a customer as much as a producer in this field. And as the customer, I want to play the best possible games with the best possible music. If I have the ability in my position as a creator for the industry to help inspire others or teach them things or show them the mistakes I've made in the hope that they might not make them themselves, such that then down the road, they do something super amazing and a thing I could never have imagined or things that are just far better than I could have done, but I helped them achieve that by showing them my process that inspired them to go off and improve on it or whatever, then the customer side of me benefits. I get to play better games because they're making better games. And I'm just, again, a tiny, tiny little brick in a huge sea of bricks that potentially these people are walking on into to achieve that goal. But if I can be of some use in that way, then the player will benefit. And that's, at the end of the day, kind of why I got into this to begin with. I played games and loved them, and I watched movies and I love them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a funny kind of a selfish instinct in that I want to play the best possible games, and maybe I might help someone to achieve that. But mostly I just like being helpful and useful to my friends and colleagues and those just getting started, especially students. So hopefully that is a satisfying answer. That's going to have to do it for this one. I found so many questions that I loved, especially because it's been like 6 months since I did the last one of these. So if I didn't get to one of yours, please just copy and paste it. Honestly, even if you just saw a question that interested you by someone else, copy and paste it. I just like to have a single source to look for so I don't have to go hunting. So please forgive my kind of laziness in that regard. But I really, really appreciate these. These are always just consistently very thought-provoking and interesting and give me pause and make me have to really kind of think about my answer. And I love that. So I'm grateful to you all. I got a ton of fun stuff coming up on this channel. So as always, thanks for checking it out and for your support and liking and subscribing and all that stuff. I grimace saying those words, but I guess it's necessary. I really enjoyed doing this. I really appreciate y'all checking it out, and we'll catch you next time.